Yeah, hi, Natasha. And so this is actually the first time we're hearing Vladimir Putin come out and speak, especially about that bombing in that bridge just yesterday. Also, the first comments that he has made now after President Biden made his comments Thursday, speaking to supporters, calling it an Armageddon scenario, saying that the threat for a nuclear attack from Vladimir Putin is real. Before we play President Putin's comments, let's remind everybody what exactly President Biden said. Here, speaking to supporters, he says, quote, could be the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis we have a direct threat of the use of nuclear weapons if, in fact, things continue down the path they are going. Now, here is what Vladimir Putin said just today on this bridge attack.
There is no doubt that this is an act of terrorism aimed at destroying Russia's critically important civilian infrastructure.
Now, the bridge was the only physical connection between Russia and Crimea, which was part of Ukraine until 2014 when Putin annexed it by force. It's also a very important supply line for Russian military to funnel weapons and supplies into Ukraine. So the bridge bombing really was just the latest in a series of setbacks for Russia. Ukraine's latest offensive has regained thousands of square kilometers of territory back from Russia, and the Russian military reporting shortages of supplies, low morale, and has fled multiple strategic cities and towns in retreat. So clearly, right now, Russia's military, their backs are against the wall. And that is why threats from Vladimir Putin to launch a nuclear attack in this particular moment are so serious. Admiral John Kirby says President Biden's rhetoric using the term Armageddon was appropriate. Here's what he said.
The president was reflecting the very high stakes that they're in play right now, Martha, when you have modern nuclear power and the leader of that modern nuclear power willing to use irresponsible rhetoric the way that Mr. Putin has several times in just the last week or two.
Meantime, power is back on at the Zaporizhia power plant, averting a nuclear disaster, at least for the time being. But fighting and shelling still continues there. More than a dozen Ukrainians were killed and 60 others were injured. Meantime, the defense minister in Ukraine issued a video message directly to Russian troops, telling them to abandon their posts and to drop their weapons, essentially saying, how do you want to be remembered? And telling them that you can still save Russia from tragedy and save the Russian army from humiliation, but time is running out. Natasha.
Wow, Joe Khalil live for us in D.C. Thank you. And as you were saying, the president invoking Armageddon when talking about Russia's nuclear threat. And today, National Security Council spokesman John Kirby responded to those remarks, saying, quote, his comments were not based on new or fresh intelligence or new indications that Mr. Putin has made a decision to use nuclear weapons. We are joined by former U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper. Mark, thank you so much for being here.
Good evening. Great to be with you.
What do you make of the president's comments, and are they in line with current U.S. intelligence?
Well, I don't know if they're in line with U.S. intelligence, but I think they are clearly an overstatement, which is not helpful. I think the statement of calling it an Armageddon scares people and in some ways undermines our own deterrent capability. There are so many differences between the situation now and the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. I mean, first of all, back then it was the United States versus the USSR head on. Back then, we had conventional forces threatening one another. Back then, we had nuclear-armed B-52s in the skies, prepared to strike if necessary. That was near Armageddon. We're not near that. That said, we got to be concerned about what Putin is saying. We got to keep a careful eye on what's happening in his weapons storage areas and with his nuclear forces. But we can't be self-deterred from doing what's right and from helping the Ukrainians defeat the Russians.
So do you think that President Biden is inciting undue panic?
I think he's unnecessarily scaring people and undermining our own position. And our own position is not just the United States, but the NATO allies. What it does is it may signal to Putin that we're being intimidated and therefore less likely to support the Ukrainians or do what needs to be done if he just continues to ratchet up that type of rhetoric.
I mean, it's a fine line when it comes to this rhetoric. We want to show force, but as you said, not, tip over to what you're talking about. What do you think the administration should be saying? What message should it be sending to the Kremlin?
Well, we should continue to send messages privately. We need to continue to rally the allies and make sure they share our resolve. But I think we need to publicly state that if we see any indication that tactical nuclear weapons are being moved from their storage areas or being moved to where they may be deployed on Iskander missiles or tactical aircraft, that we will immediately put up an air cap over Ukraine and make sure that anything coming from those airfields or launch sites will be shot down. We shouldn't talk about reacting to the war, to the use of a nuclear weapon, as much as trying to prevent it. And I think a preventive action like that, a declaratory statement that says what we will do if we see movement of tactical nuclear weapons, I think sends a tougher message of resolve back to Putin.
Well, what is your read on the current state of the war in Ukraine? Because there is a narrative right now of a Putin whose back is increasingly against the wall with recent losses. Are you concerned about what he may be capable of if he feels cornered?
Well, yes, you have to be concerned. I mean, look, this has been a strategic failure from day one. It keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Everything from not capturing his initial objectives of Kyiv to the addition of 2 NATO allies, Sweden and Finland. And now we're seeing the possible collapse of the Russian army. So you do have to get concerned. You have to watch very carefully what he does as his options are limited and as the Russian army continues to recede. But that said, we cannot allow ourselves to be self-deterred. Keep in mind, this is not just a war between Russia and Ukraine. This is a war between the autocracies of the world and the democracies of the world. And I guarantee you, Xi Jinping in Beijing is watching very carefully what the United States and our allies are doing.
Yeah, and what message do you think that China is receiving from all of this so far?
Well, what we want him to see is strength and not weakness in the face of saber rattling or weakness in the face of loose rhetoric. We want him to see strength and resolve and a commitment to defend democracies and to defend smaller nations against neighbors who bully them.
How would the U.S. specifically respond to Russia's use of nuclear weapons?
Well, I don't think you want to put those hypotheticals out there, but I think there has to be a very serious response. We could go after their nuclear launch sites and destroy them using conventional means. We don't want to go up that nuclear ladder, but we could destroy launch sites. Again, we could put the air cap up and protect any additional strikes. We could sink ships in the Black Sea that may be shooting nuclear-tipped missiles toward Ukraine. But again, I think the key right now is showing strength, showing resolve, and showing the willingness to stand up to Putin and not looking like we're being intimidated by him.
Last question for you. Do you believe that Biden's comments now and Putin's threats so far are moving this war closer to a breaking point?
Well, I think the actions of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian army are moving it to a breaking point in favor of the Ukrainians as they continue to build momentum. And I think the key to that is for the United States and its allies to continue to stand behind Ukraine with weapons and arms and ammunition, diplomatic support, economic sanctions, everything we can to beat back the Russian army and to force them out of Ukrainian territory, which, by the way, includes Crimea.
Former U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Espers, truly appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.